Hello, third graders. I wanted to continue with our story, Leprechauns Don't Play Basketball by Debbie Dady and Marsha Thornton Jones. We are going to be reading chapter 4 today, but before we go on to chapter 4, let's review chapter 3, which was Mr. Potato Head. And one of the questions I had was, who is Mr. Potato Head? And we found out that that was the name that Eddie gave to Mr. O'Grady, kind of a snarky name for him. Some of the things that we can think about with the character, Melody seems frustrated with Eddie's antics in this chapter. Also, we see that Eddie is becoming more disrespectful. He's trying to disrupt the teachers. He's kind of mean because he tied Melody's shoelaces together to make her fall intentionally. We also learned a little bit more about Mr. O'Grady. He's a very short Irish man. He seems that he might be a prankster too. We also found out about Coach Ellison. He is the gym teacher. So, a summary of the story, we can think again about our previously in Leprechauns Don't Play Basketball. The somebody wanted but so then can help us with the summary. So, Coach Ellison is the gym teacher. He introduces Mr. O'Grady, a very small teacher from Ireland, to the third grade class. Mr. O'Grady wants to teach the students Irish folk dancing, but Eddie wants to drive the brand new teacher batty and continue his pranks. Eddie ties Melody's shoes together. She falls and gets mad at his pranks. And then Mr. O'Grady, he just doesn't seem to be too upset about that, which bothers Eddie because Eddie just wants to get teachers mad. So let's think on to chapter 4, Bowling for Dancers. And I know that Mr. O'Grady was going to teach that Irish folk dancing. So I'm wondering if Eddie is going to throw bowling balls at the dancers because I know sometimes we have bowling in gym. We will see. Chapter 4, Bowling for Dancers. Eddie watched his friends act like grasshoppers on a trampoline. There's no way I'm going to hop around like that, he muttered while sneaking behind the bleachers. There, waiting for Eddie, were enough basketballs to make 30 seals happy. The balls were in 2 huge string bags. Eddie jerked on the strings and turned the balls loose. With only a little help from Eddie, they started rolling straight for the dancers and Mr. O'Grady. So not bowling balls, but basketballs. Bowling for dancers! Eddie giggled as he waited for kids to start falling. But the balls never reached their targets. Instead, they slowed down and stopped. Eddie scratched his head. What's going on? Eddie didn't notice Mr. O'Grady reaching deep into his marble bag as the balls started rolling again. Only this time, they were heading straight for Eddie. Eddie stepped away from the rolling balls, but they were like magnets. The more he high-stepped, the more the balls bumped against his feet. I'm glad to see you are joining our happy jig. Mr. O'Grady's voice suddenly came from behind him. Eddie jumped and banged into the bleachers. He rubbed his head and stuttered, No, no, dancing's for girls. To dance is to live, Mr. O'Grady smiled. My people always are dancing. 'Tis the men that love it the most. And he rolled his eyes. Then the men are sissies. The sound of Mr. O'Grady's laughter matched the music from the record player. There's nothing wrong with liking a good time. Do I see in the picture Mr. O'Grady laughing in the background with some of the other kids? And Eddie getting bombarded by all those basketballs and doing a little dance because of that. Eddie couldn't argue with that. Mr. O'Grady's eyes crinkled with laughter as he continued. Dancing is one of the 3 ways we folk have fun. What are the other 2 ways? Eddie asked as he kicked a basketball out of his way. Mr. O'Grady pulled open his drawstring pouch. A little dancing and a few more gems in our pouches make us happy as a robin in spring. Eddie stared at the sparkling stones of different colors in the pouch. Where'd you get those? He asked. That's what I'm a-telling you, Mr. O'Grady laughed as he pulled out a stone the color of a cherry. He rubbed it gently with his thumb. The folk like to collect stones from around the world. Eddie stared at the bright gem. Jewelry is for sissies, too, Eddie finally said. What's the third thing you do to have fun? "'Tis the favourite pastime of the folk," Mr. O'Grady whispered, "but a thing the monsters from Transylvania cannot stand." Eddie jerked to attention. "What do you know about Transylvania?" "I know they cannot stand the tricks of the folk," Mr. O'Grady said. "But Mrs. Jeepers is from the Transylvanian Alps," Eddie blurted, and he wished he'd kept his mouth shut because Mr. O'Grady's face grew as red as his sweatsuit. "This teacher of yours, would she have hair the colour of the sunrise, and be a serious sort who allows no fun-loving shenanigans?" "Oh, boy, that's for sure," Eddie agreed. "And would she be wearing a brooch the colour of spring grass?" Mr. O'Grady asked. Eddie's eyes got big as he nodded. "So she is here," Mr. O'Grady chuckled, as he slid the red stone into his pouch and jerked the string tight. Mr. O'Grady grabbed one of the basketballs and twirled away from Eddie. Without another word, he zigzagged his way through the dancing third graders to the record player. The screech of the needle across the record brought the dancers to a halt. "What's the matter?" Liza asked. "Weren't we doing the dance right?" Mr. O'Grady smiled. "You dance like butterflies in a field of daisies, but our friend Eddie seems to be a-wanting to play with basketballs instead." All the kids glared at Eddie, who was still trying to kick away the basketballs. "But I was having fun dancing," Liza whined. Melody nodded her head. "Eddie ruins everything." Mr. O'Grady bounced the ball. "Basketball is a grand way to be having fun, too. Why, back home, they call me Magic O'Grady on the court. Let me be a-showing you a few tricks." The third graders watched Mr. O'Grady dribble the ball down the center of the court. His little pouch jingled with each step. "Aw, that's nothing," Eddie sneered as Mr. O'Grady went by. "My kid sister could do that with her eyes closed." Mr. O'Grady stopped in the middle of the court just long enough to reach into his little pouch. Suddenly, the ball became an orange blur as Mr. O'Grady whizzed the ball between his legs and around his back. The kids gasped as the little man in the red suit twirled the ball on the tip of one finger. In the next second, he threw the ball all the way down the court. As the ball swished through the net without touching the rim, Mr. O'Grady danced a little jig. "All right!" Howie clapped and poked Eddie in the ribs. Eddie watched as the third graders of Bailey Elementary crowded around the short gym teacher, and then he shrugged. "We'll just see how long his Irish luck lasts." And that is the end of chapter 4. A couple of things that I was noticing with Mr. O'Grady. It was kind of interesting that he was digging into that marble sack and rubbing the red gem inside it. And it was interesting, too, that the balls were going at the kids and suddenly they came back towards Eddie. So some things to keep in mind.